Now we would like to move on to the last roundtable for today. The theme is Inclusive Society, which would be chaired by the unit chief of the Aichi Developmental Disability Center of the Institute for Developmental Research. We would like to have KIDA Tetsuo Sensei, Aichi chair the session. The floor is yours. Thank you very much for your warm introduction. My name is KIDA. I belong to the Institute for Developmental Research of the Aichi Developmental Disability Center. Congratulations for the 15th anniversary for the WIAS. I'm very much honored to have been invited over to chair today's roundtable. I would like to thank the directors. Well, up until 2014, I used to be at the WIAS and Director Miyajima back then, and also the Vice Director and Kawata-san from many senseis, and also and from the AVO staff members I was being supported. Thanks to that, I was able to focus on team study and together with the people in a variety of the fields I was able to cooperate with, which I have a fond memory of. So today's session, this session is titled Inclusive Society. So amidst the uncertainty, times of the uncertainty, in order to realize an inclusive society, we would like to tackle and see what actually is perceived as an issue, what sort of challenges we should face. What is it that researchers would be able to do is what we would like to explore. So the human and the society created by the humans are filled with diversity and respect for the diversity, and also the intention to do that, of course, are important. And what is inclusive society? Which this is a society that overrides the differences of race, gender, class, generation, and geography, and ensures inclusion and equality of the opportunities as well as the capabilities of the members of the society to determine an agreed set of social institutions. In 2015, at the UN Summit, SDGs had been established, and SDGs are currently being promoted throughout the world. And the concept of the inclusiveness is included as a part of almost all the 17 goals. For example, the goal 4, 8, 11, and so on. If you could take a look at it, you could see the word inclusive. The things like the whole and every such words are also included as a part of other goals as well. Therefore, the inclusive society does not leave anyone behind, of course, is necessary in order to achieve the sustainable society, as you may know. Therefore, the diversity and inclusiveness and such concepts are quite important, as you can see, as we humans go forward. And there are a variety of activities that have been conducted, and we are starting to see some achievements, but we believe there are many issues that still have to be tackled, which I think is a reality that we should realize. Not only that, recently things like the COVID-19 pandemic, and also disputes in many countries and issues of aging population and declining birth rate. There are a variety of events like them that are causing impacts to our society, which I believe is causing some impacts to the inclusive society. For example, the decrease of the exchange between the people, and also international the disputes and so on. And such events eliminate the diversity. It seems as if we are disconnected, meaning that we are going towards a diverse direction towards or against the inclusive society. It seems. Against such backdrop, at this session, the people from the natural science and humanities and so on, from the variety of the fields, we have invited over the four the lectures to provide us with the talk in regards to the inclusive society and what can be contributed towards the realization of the inclusive society. After we are done hearing the speakers speak, we would like to move on to the Q&A session. First and foremost, Yamaguchi-san, are you ready? Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Yamaguchi, and thank you very much. I am the assistant professor for the WIAS. Today, I would like to talk on the topic of how can the legal system contribute to an inclusive society, especially from the perspective of access to justice. First and foremost, in the changing society, what sort of roles can the laws can play? What is law, and what are the types of laws? There are many discussions being done on them, but today I would like to talk in relation to the inclusive society, and I would like to touch upon the reports being made by None and Salznick. Under the paper titled Law and Society in Transition, based on the assumption that the laws would change step by step, they had presented three types of law. First is repressive law. Well, other rulers, for the sake of the interest, would apply political issue, and as a tool, they would utilize this sort of law. But in the modern day society, the regulation would be independent from the authority, and the laws would be applied in a strict manner. It would be highly autonomous, but on the other hand, it would not be able to respond highly, and so such are the shortcomings. Therefore, let's take a look at the responsive law. It has the feature of the autonomous laws, but at the same time, it would be able to stay responsive to the demands of the people according to the definition being provided. So, as we work on creating the inclusive society, such the responsiveness is going to be quite important. Therefore, today I would especially put my focus on to the law support being provided to elderlies and also the person with a disability. Let me explain about the elders law and disability law. First and foremost, what is the elder law? Well, first and foremost, it had been developed first in the United States. In the States, there is an elder law study group, and according to their definition, elderly law is as follows: a specialized area of law focused on counseling and representing older persons or their representatives on later in life planning and other legal issues of particular importance to older adults. And unlike many other areas of the law, elder law is defined primarily by client population to be served, not by the distinct set of the legal doctrines. In the United States, the reason why it had developed is because of the lawyers' practices. Their practices had led to the development of the elder law. And not only that, the things like the laws that put focus on the poverty, for example, had been touched upon and tackled in the law school, which led to the development of this. What about the elder law in Japan? In 1995, Basic Act of Measures for the Aging Society had been established. In relation to elders, there are a variety of other sort of laws available, but according to Professor Higuchi, who is pronounced the academics on this topic, he refers to three policies of the elder law. One is ex ante, for example, asset management. Before the travel is closed, the planning would be conducted as a part of as a way of the asset management, for example. Another is empowerment for the positive the life. The empowerment would be conducted. And another is the personalization. Of course, there are a variety of different sorts of elders. Therefore, personalized support would be provided. Would have to be provided as a part of the support to be provided to the elders in the field of the law. Next up, I would like to touch upon the disability law in Japan. Well, disability law refers to laws concerning people with a disability, and disability law is not the one law, but it entails everything starting from the constitution, civil law, labor laws, and so on. That is the meaning of the disability law. In 2006, Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities had been adopted in the EU, and in 2011, revision of the Basic Act of Persons with a Disability had been conducted. In 2014, Japan ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Persons with Disabilities. This convention and also the Basic Act of the Rights of the Person with the Basic Act for Persons with disability adopt the social models of the disability, not only the functional disability, but for example, such the barriers that exist in society, include the step difference and so on, would be is entailed under the model of the social model, especially on the Article 1 of the Basic Act of Persons with a Disability. Normalization such that instead of dealing with the people with disability as a special person, normalization is being argued, and also the inclusive society concept is being argued here. As we've seen up until the regulations in relation to the elderly and also disabilities are now being established and are being developed nowadays. But now I would like to talk about access to justice. Without the existence of the access to justice, these people would not be able to exercise their rights, and it would be difficult for us to protect their rights. It's not really limited to elderly and people with a disability, but the access to justice can be an issue. Let me give you an example. The right to vote of the adult world. In 2013, Tokyo District Court had made the ruling in regards to the right to vote of the adult world, which led to the revision of which led to recovery of the right to vote of the adult world. Well, of course, legal settlement is not the only option, but not only the court, but also from the lawyers and access to ADL. Such legal services, access to such legal services is going to be quite important. But legal settlement is only one of the options to solve the issue, which I would have to take note of. As a part of the selectable option, legal settlement would have to be there. For that purpose, access to justice is going to be quite critical. That's the point. And so, for the elderly and people with a disability, what sort of the barriers does exist in terms of the access to legal services? For example, there are physical barriers. For example, people may have difficulty access. Another is the financial barriers. This is not really limited to elderly or the people with a disability, but people may not be able to afford to use the services. Another is informational barriers. People may not know as to where the services are being provided. And because of the disability, people may have difficulty utilizing the internet. And not only limited to elderly and the people with a disability, but people may feel the psychological barriers, feel hesitant to utilize. And there are people who may have dementia or other diseases which may lead to people having difficulty making judgment, and that the issue they may not realize that the issues they face is indeed a legal issue. So such would be understood as a cognitive barriers. Therefore, we have to think as to how we support the access to the legal services for these people. Well, there is a local support being provided, which I think it can be quite effective. For example, through the network, people may be able to access the services, and the neighbors may realize that the elderly or the person with the disabilities would have a need to access the legal support, and then the neighbors would be able to refer them to the support. So interagency cooperation or the networks would be necessary, and this is being touched upon in the regulations in relation to the adult world, for example, as well too. So there are still some challenges that are in relation to the support being provided through the network. You can see some of the examples. For example, to begin with, we must ask ourselves as to how we be able to build an effective support network. And there is a possibility that the support would be perceived as intrusion, and therefore people may criticize that this would be an excessive paternalism. And if the people may not have the sufficient amount of the capability to judge, people may not know that they could use adult word and so on. I had to rush a bit, but with this I would like to conclude my report. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Yamaguchi Sensei. In relation to the elderly and the people with disability, you touched upon those. Your focus and kind of support that would be necessary had been touched upon. That was easy to understand. Thank you.
I would like to invite Professor HUANG Jie of the Institute for Advanced Research at Nagoya University.
Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Aichi Fong. And I belong to the Nagoya University. I'm the designated assistant professor under the title of the possibility of the inclusive society within the multi-ethnic community in South China for overcoming ethnic differences in populations. Personally, I would like to give you the talk. China is a multi-ethnic country, and more than 80% of the population is Han Chinese, and there are other ethnic minorities as well too. Well, under the region which I have conducted my research at the Guangxi, there are many ethnic minorities living, the 12 of them, and they live in the village, and sometimes they form the community. But other than that, there are cases where the multiple number of the ethnic minorities that form the community, which is examples that I see a lot more. And amongst the ethnic minorities, of course, there are big differences in terms of the customs and so how do they overcome such differences that they find amongst each other so that they would be able to look for the possibility to coexist? That actually is the theme of the topic that I am tackling as a part of my research. Why is it that this is quite important? Just recently, the expressways had been established in the Guangxi because of the national government's policy in between 2010 to 2020. Many expressways had been constructed, and almost all the towns and villages had been connected with the village roads network. Because of that, there was an increase in the migrant workers, and about 60% of the population that lived in the village of the local area had decided to go out to work, which led to depopulation and super aging amongst the remaining population. Please refer to the diagram here. In 2010 census, it showed that the main population of the area is age 0 to 14 and 15 correction. The population that belong to those who are in the age between 15 to 59 had went down. As you can see, the aging is proceeding every year. Therefore, in the Guangxi, this issue is starting to become the issue that they cannot ignore. Here is the location of the survey sites, which is Sanjiang at the Guangxi, which is an area where the minorities live. Well, in the west of the Sanjiang, there is a town called F town. Let me just give you the overview of the survey site. Sanjiang County has a rich forest and has a very convenient shipping waterways. Therefore, for correction, from over 100 years ago, they were working on the trading with other regions, including Guangdong and Fujian. And many Han, other people, had moved on to the area, and they formulated and established several towns. And F town is one of the towns that had been built. Currently, the variety of the minorities, together with the Han, is living. The Hans usually live in the shopping street, whereas the Miaos live in the hillside, whereas the Dong lives in the river, whereas other ethnic groups would live in the scattered way in the surrounding mountains. In 1980s, the highways became the main transportation modes, and people used to use the river as the main transportation mode before, but things started to change. There was the increase of the migrant workers, and the shopping street became less populated, and there was an increase of the empty houses, but the F-town actually had developed successfully. And as described by many newspapers, it was known to become the community with the harmony and multi-ethnic common development and prosperity. Why is it? Actually, it is said that the efforts being paid by the locals actually had a vital role. One is the forming of the tradition of the regular markets. They have sustained this custom to hold the regular markets. For example, the minorities that lived in the mountain area had brought in their local the products, including clothing, foods, and so on, to the regular market. So this led to the formulation of the market where people could exchange their living materials and local products. And because they could they use the language, they could communicate. Well, some other people was fluent in other languages, which led to them to be able to communicate. Next is the ethnic intermarriage. There was an encouragement of the ethnic intermarriage. In case of the ethnic intermarriage, that locally people were allowed to have two children, and there was an encouragement, the policy to have them educated. Therefore, there were many families with ethnic intermarriage. Furthermore, the cultures in relation to the foods and so on actually had been combined, which led to the enablement of the sharing of the cultures. Next is the utilization of the traditional resources. Local people had the so-called the headman system, which had been succeeded from the past. The people at each town had formulated the outreach community. The people who are over 50 would be able to join in this system, and people with the virtue will be selected as a person in church. The support provided to others living alone, and the building of the roads and bridges, negotiation for the dispute solving, and so on. Through these activities, the system is making contribution. This led to enrichment of the people's livelihood, especially dowries. Next up is the reliance on the power of the belief and sacrifice. And also Kung Fu and so on. Such folk gods of the Han Chinese are being enshrined. As the Hans started living in this area, these gods had been imported, and currently these gods are being worshipped by the local minorities, and they are being enshrined for the happiness. And these matters are being managed by the elderlies at the group as well. And this is considered to be one of the factors that enable the multi-ethnic community. Here is the conclusion. And currently, there is a decline in population and super aging problems. But the local communities are succeeding at the traditional the culture and promoting the intermarriage, and with the power of the belief and sacrifice, they have been able to realize the coexistence at a certain level, so that they would be able to alleviate the impact of the decrease of the population. I think they can make contribution to this can make the contribution to multicultural inclusive society. But there still is issues, including inadequacy of the medical care system for the elderly. That is not really my specialty, so I hope that I'll be able to get a hint as to how I'll be able to solve these issues by listening to other presenters' presentation. Thank you. Ko-sensei, thank you very much. Well, there is a super aging and the increase of the migrant workers, but still, these communities are being considered and understood to be the harmonious society. You gave us an explanation on that.
Next is Assistant Professor Nao Nishida of WIAS, please. Thank you for the introduction.
早稲田大学高等研の講師の1年目の西田直と申します。
Now Nishida, first year
専門分野はですね、
at WIAS
がん生物学
as assistant professor.
本日は私たちの体を
My
構成する様々な細
specialty,
胞
my
が
the
どの
field
よ
of
うに
expertise
共
is
通して私た
cancer.
ちの
So
体
today
を
I'd like
作
to
ってい
talk
るんだ
about
という
how various cells
細
that
胞
comprise our body work collaboratively together to create our body. So I'd like to talk about the society of cells and its relationship to cancer.
私たちの先ほどの角井先生の話
So
もありまし
as
た通り、私たちの体は
the previous panels,
37
Kakui-san
兆個以上の細胞
mentioned,
からなっております。
our cells are the building blocks of our body. We are made up of 37 trillion cells with more than 200 known different functions. And these cells form tissues like skin and muscle. And these tissues comprise organs such as the stomach and heart. And these organs form organ systems such as the digestive system. And all of these together form organisms like ourselves.
でここで少し紹介したい
So,
働く細胞という
let me introduce this
アニメにもなってますけど、これ紹
anime
介したいんですけども
and manga called
この
Cells
漫画では
at Work.
赤血球や白血球
So
や
cells at work
血
features
小板などの
red
様
blood
々な
cells and
機
white
能
blood
を
cells
働き
and
を持った細
platelets
胞たちを
and
擬人化
various
してですね
cells
でこのような体の
that
中で働く
are
細胞を擬人化しまし
personified.
てでこの細胞たちが
And
この
these
体が怪
different
我をしたと
cell
か
characters
風邪をひいたなどのトラブルに
fight
対応
various
するためにいろいろドタバタするという
troubles
漫画
like
です。でこれはかな
injury
り
or
科学
cold.
的にも正確で
I
イメージ
highly
につきやすい
recommend
のでお
this
勧めしたいんです
anime
けども
because it is
ここで述べた
scientifically
いのは
quite
ですね
accurate
様
and
々
very
な種
easy
類の
to
細胞
imagine.
が役割の細
So
胞
what I'd
が
like to say here
体
is
の
that
中で
various
協
cells
力し合っ
with
て
different roles are working in
働いて
collaboration
私たちの
to
体を
maintain
成
our
立させて
bodily
いるっていう
functions.
そういう細胞まるで私たちの社会
So
人間社会
cells
のようであるっていうことを
are
紹介させていただきたい
creating a
です。
society very much like the
で
human
細胞は
society.
このように協調して働くんですけども
So
時には
cells
細
work
胞は別の細胞を
collaboratively
排除するとい
together,
うことも
but
し
in
ま
some
す。
cases, cells
例えば臓器
reject
移植に代
other
表され
cells.
るような
For
他人の
example,
細胞
in
を
case of organ transplant,
体内に移植した
when
場合で
you
す。
transplant
これ
other
は
people's
表面
cells
細胞
into your
表面
body,
の HLA と呼ばれるタン
then
パク質の種類が違うことによって
because of the difference in surface protein called HLA, the immunity cells recognize it as a exogenous foreign cell and attack the cell, causing apoptosis, rejecting the cells. And in other cases, when there are genetic mutations, or if a cell is infected by a virus, such cells are recognized as exogenous and rejected by the immune cells. And there are also other cell rejection that are not from the immune cells. This is called a cell competition, which is a research theme of Professor Maruyama of WIAS. So if a cell becomes abnormal or mutated, the surrounding homogeneous cells detect it and reject such cells. So the normal cells around the mutated cells would reject such a cell. And this is shown in the picture. However, if the mutated cell is able to overcome the resistance of the surrounding normal cells, then the normal cells could be rather driven away. And this is how cancer forms as the mutated cell proliferates. So like this, various cells work together and at times reject and eliminate one another. And this requires information exchange. So like humans, we meet face to face or use various tools like our phones and SNS for communication. Similarly, these cells also send signals via surface proteins through direct contact. And also, In other
直
cases,
接接触することなく炎症
release
サイトカインとか
inflammatory
増殖を促す因子などを
cytokines
細胞
and
の
growth
外に
stimulating
放出
factors
することによって
outside of the cells
直接接触
to
すること
transmit
なく
information
情報を伝えたりもしています。
without having direct
この
contact with other
うちの
cells.
一つとしてコミュニケーションツール
So
の一
one
つとし
of
まして
such a communication
私が
tool
研究してお
is
ります
the
エクストラセルラー
extracellular
ベシクル
vesicles,
細胞外
which
情
is
報
the
日本語で
topic
は
of my
エクソソームとも呼
research.
ばれますがこれを研
And
究に
so
私は対象しています。
extracellular vesicles is
その細胞
the
外
focus
情
of
報
my
というのは
study.
100ナノメートル
So
ほどの直径
extracellular
すなわち
vesicles are
大
about
体ウイルスと同じぐ
100
ら
nanometer
い
in
のサイ
diameter.
ズなん
It's
で
about
す
the
けれ
same
ども
size as a
で
virus.
これが脂質二重膜脂質でできた
And
二重膜で囲まれたこのよう
it
な風船のような形をしています。
resembles this
この
these
中には細胞
balloons
の中身
encased
すなわ
in
ち
a double membrane
DNA
of fat.
RNA タンパク質
And
などの
inside this
情報
extracellular
物質が入
vesicle
っています。詰め込ま
are
れていまし
the
て
various
これが一つの
contents
細胞
like
から外
DNA,
に放出
RNA,
され
and
ま
protein
して
information
周りの
material.
別の細胞に
And
取
these
り込まれる
contents
とい
are
うことで
released
中
from
身
one
が
cell
受け
and
渡
taken
さ
up
れ
by
て相手
another
の
cell,
細胞に情報を
and
伝
this
える
information is
でそれ
transmitted
によって
to
相
the
手
other
の細
cell,
胞に何らかの
causing
変化を
some
起こす
kind
と
of
いうことを
change in
行っ
the
ています。
receiving cell.
でこの細胞外商法っていうのはほぼすべての
So
細胞が分泌して放出していますので、
these
この細胞外商
extracellular
法っていうのは
vesicles
私たちの
are
血液とか涙
secreted
と
by
か
almost all
唾液
cells.
とかいろんなところ
So
に含まれ
it
全部
is
含まれて
in
お
our
ります。
blood and tears and saliva
で
and so on.
私はその中でも、特にがん細胞が放
So
出する
my
細胞
study
外商法の研
focuses
究をしてい
on
ます。
the
でまず
extracellular
がんとはなん
vesicles
ですけれども、
secreted by cancer
先ほ
cells
ど
in
もちょっとあ
particular.
りましたが、もともと
I
私
mentioned
たちの
earlier
体
that
を構成して
cancer
た普通の細
is
胞
a
に
condition
遺
in
伝
which
子
the
に変異
genes
が
of the
入ってし
cells
まっ
that
て、で周りの
were
細胞の抑
originally
制とか免疫
normal
の
or
細
making up
胞
our
の抑
body
制を無視
are
して
mutated,
際限な
and
く増
the
殖していってし
number
まう
of
状
cancer
態に
cells
なります。
proliferates
で
endlessly
それによって
without
周りの
coordination
細
with the
胞
surrounding
正常な
cells.
細胞を追いやってしまって、
So
ひいては臓器の機
this
能を阻害することによって私た
drives
ちの
away
健康
and
状態を損なって
eliminates
しまいます。
the immune
でこの
system
がん組織
and
このような塊なんですけれども、これを
these
詳細に見てい
clumps
きま
of
すと、これ
cells,
は
the
実は
cancer
がん
cells,
細胞だけの塊では
are
なく
actually
て、
not just
実
made
は
up
免
of
疫
a
細
cancer
胞であ
cell,
ると
but
か
it
血管を
also
形成する細
contains
胞であ
other
るとか、
cells
その
like the
他も
immune
いろいろ
cells,
な
the blood vessel
正常な
cells,
細
and
胞って
various
いうのも
other normal
た
cells
くさ
are
ん含まれ
contained
ています。
in this tumor or
で
mass.
このがん組織っていうのは、
And these cancer cells
のしたたかなところはですね、
are
この
very
がん
smart
細胞っていうのはその先ほどの細胞
because
外傷法とかその
the
他の
cancer
因子を
cells
使いまして
use these
周りの
extracellular
正常な
vesicles
細
and
胞
other
に
factors
働
to
きかけ
spread
てその性質を変化させて
through
しま
the
って
cancer tissue
最終的に自分の味方
and
に引き込ん
alter
でしまうってい
their
うことが
properties to
挙げられま
become
す。例えば
its
免疫細
ally.
胞はがん
For
細胞を
example,
攻撃
immune cells
しま
attack
すけれ
cancer
ども、
cells,
がん細胞
but
はうまく免疫
cancer
細胞を
cells successfully can suppress immune cells and even make them allies to promote the cancer cell proliferation.
でこのようにがん細胞と周りの細胞
So
の関係を研究するっていうのは非常に治療の面
it
でも
is
重要なん
very
ですけれ
important
ど
to
も、
study the
実際
relationship
に研
between
究す
cancer
るっていうの
cells
は
and
いろいろ
surrounding
実験
cells
的な
in
技
order
術
to
的な
develop
課題があ
effective
ります。
treatments. However, there are
で
many
これまで
technical
の研究っていうの
challenges.
はやはりがん細胞の悪さに焦点を
So
当ててきた
thus
ので、
far, the
実
focus
験で
was
は
on
が
the
ん
cancer
細
cell
胞のみを
itself,
純粋に培養
meaning
した
that
が
in
ん
the
培養細
cancer
胞っていうものを使われてきました。
study,
しかし、
cells
これは
were
他の細胞
cultured
と
cancer
捉えて
cells
いないので、他の細
in
胞
which
との
only
相
cancer
互作
cells are
用を
grown
研究するには
in
不
the
適です。
petri dish.
また、患者さんの
And that's
検体
easier
と
to
かマウス
handle.
モデルっていうのは実験的に少し入手が難しい
But
ので、
it's not really effective
私
for
が使って
learning
い
the
るのはこの
relationship.
組織モデルっていうものに
And
なりま
other
す。
ways
組
is
織モ
quite
デル
difficult
組織スライスバイオっていう
because
ものなんですけど、
human
これは
specimens and
非常に
animal
単純
models
で
are not
がん
easy
組
to come
織や
by.
いろんな
So
組
what
織
I
を
use are
非常に
these
薄く薄切
tissue
りに
slice
しま
models,
して実験室
which
で
can be
栄養
handled
含む
easily.
培地中
And
で
these
生きたまま
tissue
培養
cell
するものです。
slices
これによってがん組織の中に含まれている
Tissue slice cultures are thin slices of raw tissue that are maintained alive in the laboratory with a nutrient-containing medium. And this can be used in a variety of experiments as a cancer tissue model because it contains the structure of the cancer tissue and the various other cells. And so this shows the picture of the tumor or tissue slice making.
がん組織だけではなくていろい
And
ろ
this
なこれマウ
can
スの脳
not just the cancer tissue, but these are the various organs of the mouse, such as brain, lungs, liver, and And this result shows how the relationship with surrounding cells influences the nature and behavior of cancer cells. So I am currently studying this extracellular vesicle transfer with the tumor tissue structure. And hopefully, by understanding better the relationship between the cancer cells and the surrounding normal cells, we would like to study how the cancer cells can be normalized back to normal cells, thereby suppressing their proliferation. So my summary is that our body is made up of various cells with various functions, and they cooperate and sometimes reject one another to make up our body. So the way that these different cells cooperate to form an individual organism is just like a human society, and in fact the term cellular society is often used to describe this. So this was an introduction to the cell society, and we hope that this was helpful in understanding the similarities and differences between the cell society and human society. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very micro, very difficult topic was conveyed in a very, very easy to understand manner. Thank you very much. So there's a cellular society which is quite similar to human society. There was a lot of food for thought. Thank you very much. And last speaker is Assistant Professor of WIAS, Yuko Okamoto. Hello everyone, I'm from WIAS. My name is Yuko Okamoto. I specialize in cognitive neuroscience, and from that perspective, when I look at inclusive society, I would like to talk about the difficulty in mutual understanding because of having different perspectives. So if people come from similar backgrounds and have a similar history, then it might be quite easy to understand one another. On the other hand, if diverse people come together in a group, it might be more difficult to understand or guess other people's emotions or intentions. So autism spectrum disorder is one of the neurodevelopment disorder, and one of the features is the difficulty in communication. So it is often said that people with autism spectrum disorder have difficulty in understanding the emotions or intentions of those with a typically developed individual. And also parents or supporters have difficulty in understanding children with the autism spectrum disorder. And being able to infer or speculate other people's emotion is quite interesting in of itself. And the basis seems to be coming from bidirectional imitation. So we can only know one's own action, one's own mind, and other people's actions. So in our childhood, we look at the actions of other people and we apply the relationship between one's own action and mind to that of others' actions to their minds. That is what psychology tells us in how we come to understand other people's emotions. So in my study, I have been looking at the relationship between one's actions and mind through the fMRI. So fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, is a way to measure brain activation. People's cognition, thought, and sense are born out of the information processing in the brain. And there are brain activities that correspond to our thought and cognition, and we are able to measure that with MRI. So using this method, we found that typically developed individuals Imitation awareness was occurring between the lower and higher visual cortex and parietal and frontal lobe regions through bidirectional information transfer. In particular, EBA in the higher visual cortex makes judgments about whether the actions of oneself and others are the same. And using this information, we found that the higher order judgments about the social significance of actions are made in the frontal lobe. On the other hand, adults with autism spectrum disorder have less EBA activity, which is responsible for judging whether or not their behavior is the same as that of others when imitated by others. So the vertical axis shows the activation level, and blue is the activity of typically developed individual, red is the activity of those with autism spectrum disorder. So this is just a speculation, but perhaps the difference in the function of EBA represents the possibility that there are differences in the way people feel when they are imitated. And if imitation contributes to the inference of other people's minds, it is possible that the difference in this area may be related to the difficulties in mutual understanding. Also, multiple studies have shown that EBA is not only involved in the perception of being imitated, but also in visual information processing related to the body. So we have also examined whether there is a difference when the participants perform a simpler task. So in this study, we looked at the perception of body parts. The participants of this study were children with autism spectrum disorder and typically developed children, and adults with autism spectrum disorder and typically developed adults. So the participants looked at faces, bodies, scenes, and cars in the MRI machine. So this shows the brain activity when looking at hands and feet. So left-hand side shows typically developed, and right-hand shows people with ISD. Top layer shows children, bottom layer shows adults. And as you can see, there is less activation for ASD children. So when we look at the volume of activation, children with autism spectrum disorder had less volume of activation compared to the typically developed children. However, there was no difference amongst adults. So these functions of this area will become similar as they grow up. And also amongst the typically developed children, we found that sensation avoiding is associated with body representation. This shows people with similar spatial or activity patterns in the visual cortex. Red represents limbs, and blue represents torso, and green represents face. The figure shows that children with stronger or sensory aversive tendencies are more detailed in this division. And while children with low sensory aversive tendencies are not as neatly divided. And sensory avoidance is the tendency to avoid certain sensory stimuli due to sensory sensitivity, and it is a common characteristic of children with autism spectrum disorder. We believe that the individual differences in sensory perception may lead to difficulties in mutual understanding as well. So, in terms of the difficulty of mutual understanding between people with autistic spectrum disorder and those with typical development, I have introduced a study that uses fMRI to examine individual differences in the mind, such as awareness of imitation and perception of the body, which is difficult to see from the outside. Although it is impossible to know specifically how individuals feel, it is at least possible to say that they are feeling differently. And for the sake of convenience, I mentioned the results differ between individuals with typical development and those with autism spectrum disorder. However, it is important to note that most of these results actually overlap. And it is not possible to say that one person with autism spectrum disorder is the same as another with those with the disorder. So it's not as clearly cut as everyone having autistic tendencies being in the same camp. So these are individualized way of perceiving things and the difficulties in mutual understanding. The result from it is not just for autism spectrum disorders, but also in various other situations, such as difference in culture or gender and age. And of course, we want to keep in mind these factors while communicating. But I think it's also important to note that it is not easy to understand others. And with the presumption that it is not easy to understand others, we will naturally try to listen more to other people and respect them, even if we do not agree with their values. So this may be common sense, but we often forget this in our everyday lives. I hope that research that explores these individual differences will lead to awareness that we tend to overlook in our busy lives. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. From neuroscience, the diversity of our minds and the diversity of brain activities. Thank you very much for introducing an interesting topic. So we still have a few minutes.
So first and foremost, we would like to know if there is anyone on the floor who have the burning questions for the panelists here. If so, would you please raise your hand? Anyone? Any burning questions from the floor? Well, if not, then I would like to shoot a question or two from myself, if I may. So let's get started with Yamaguchi-san. To begin with, you mentioned the importance of formulating the network. The network, that word had been touched upon several times from other speakers as well. So I assume that upon thinking about the inclusive society network shall be understood to be the key word, but the networking is being tried by a variety of people, but because of the COVID-19, in the medical field, we see the frequent issue of the insufficient resources available against that backdrop. For the elderlies with the dementia, are there sufficient amount of the supports in terms of the network being provided to these individuals? Is a question that I would like to ask. Well, thank you very much for that question, which I believe is a very important topic that shall be tackled. Well, you mentioned that especially because of the COVID-19, there is a limitation or say the insufficient amount of the human resources available. We often heard of such news. Upon providing the support, whether we have sufficient amount of the human resources available for the support or not, I think is your question. This is not really limited to COVID-19 pandemic, but when we think about the legal supports being provided to elderlies, the law professionals who are providing such support. And I must say that there is an issue in relation to profitability, especially for the lawyers who are in this field, as being indicated by many. The holders, the staff, and the lawyers that belong to such organization are playing the main role in order to provide the support for for such arteries, according to my understanding. Though there's not only the staff lawyers that belong there, the lawyers that belong to ordinary law firms are sometimes involved in the providing of the support for the arteries. So in terms of the sufficiency of the human resources due to the issue of the profitability, not many are involved, and at the hotel there is also the limitation to the budget available. Although they are still vigorously working on providing the support in terms of the human resources, the people who the number of the lawyers who will be able to be the guardians of the adult world. We have to question ourselves as to whether we have a sufficient number of such people as we see the increase of the people who in the high age. Thank you very much for responding to my question in an easy to understand way. This is not really the question, but I have a comment. Well, before people become dementia, I think to tackle such people, I think is quite important. And from the stand, the MCIs or there is a stage at the preclinical level, and there is also the SCI. Subjective or the decline of the recognition. People may feel that they tend to forget about things nowadays, and it is said that there is a higher risk of those people who recognize that their the cognitive capabilities going down may become the dementia. And we think about that. I think if we'll be able to have the involvement of the researchers who are involved in the neuroscience, I think things can be quite interesting. Next question is to be directed to HUANG Jie sensei. Well, in relation to arteries, I would like to ask you a question. You mentioned about the arteries, the organization, which is functioning very well, and thanks to their activities, they had been able to formulate a harmonious society. That's how I understood your speech, and I thought that maybe it could be of use for the Japanese society as well. One question, elders, do they have some sort of exchange with the people that belong to a different age, like children, for example? Kida sensei, thank you very much for your question. Well, in the region where the ethnic minorities live, usually the children would go out to work, but they would return to the community at the high season of the cultivation. And there is lots of opportunities where the elders would be able to have a conversation and give an anecdote to the younger the people, and they usually live together with their own grandparents, and they would participate at local festivities, and that's how they learn as to how those festivals are being held. So in that sense, I think those things can be perceived as a very positive matters. Thank you very much. I understood. So it's not that they need to have such an event intentionally, because they have the regular communication. I think that the communication between the people who belong to different age group is going to be quite important for formulation of the inclusive society, which can lead to the well-being.
Now, my next question is to Nishida sensei. Maybe your presentation was quite difficult, so I might not be able to keep up with everything. But your topic was about the cell or communication. And in the future, perhaps you are able to prevent cells from becoming abnormal or prevent metastasis and so on. Is my understanding correct? Yes.
そうするとも
So
ちろんその患者さんとそれを取り巻く人たちの QOL もちろん高まってくると思う
this, of course, improves the quality of life of the patients and their families. So I think it's great for well-being.
その時にも例えばこうすごくちょっと細かな話で申し訳ないですけど、その
And
細胞療法をターゲ
so
ットとして
extracellular vesicle is the focus of your
例えば
study.
その中にがんに対す
And
る薬剤みたいなものを
do you think that perhaps drugs can be included in the extracellular vesicle to combat cancer? Can you talk about that? Thank you very much for your question. Yes, that is exactly one area that is being studied. I was not able to explain fully toward the end of my presentation, but there is a communication from the cancer cell to normal cell, and there's also communication from the normal cell to the cancer cell. And by having a better understanding of this communication, we could use extracellular vesicles to prevent the mutated cells from further developing, or we could stop the signals from the cancer cells to other cells. So I have been involved in these studies, and conversely, the extracellular vesicles communicate from one drug to another, and so we can transport drugs from the extracellular vesicles, and also something similar to the RNA vaccines, messenger RNA and even smaller micro RNA can be transported by the extracellular vesicles to bring the body or the cells back to a normal state or attack cancer cells. And also drugs in the form of compounds could be carried by the extracellular vesicles. This is really a hot topic of research. And cancer cells bring the surrounding cells to the bad direction, meaning that cancer cells make allies of the normal cells. So there is also the normal cells rejecting or eliminating the mutated cells. And by strengthening the communication from the normal cells, there are ways to prevent cancer from developing. So that could also be one approach. So there are various directions of research. Thank you very much. So listening to you, the world of cells are quite similar to human society. And there are the approaches in preventing cancer was quite similar to how we think about inclusive society. Of course, it would be ideal if we can coexist with cancer cells, preventing them from proliferating, and just living together with cancer cells could be one ideal society. My last question is to Okamoto Sensei, and my question could be a bit different from your presentation. I believe that you are working on developing a global network amongst people with ASD. So you compared children against adults today, and in the case of children with ASD, the brain activation was lower in some cases compared to typically developed children. And perhaps looking at people with different attributes with ASD, you could see an even bigger difference. For example, do you think that cultural difference could have an impact? Thank you for the question. So I didn't cover this in my presentation today, but people with autism in the UK, US, New Zealand, I am conducting research together, and we are trying to compare people with ASD amongst these different countries. So what we are doing is to gain a better understanding amongst the people who typically developed and the ASD. And we also have this camouflage code that people with autism try to copy people who are typically developed in order to blend in. And so that kind of data is now being accumulated across different countries. I believe that there are indeed cultural differences. And people with intellectual disability with ASD. So my data is actually quite limited because I'm just targeting a small group amongst the people with ASD, not all of the people with ASD. And there are people with different level of sensitivity and different level of impairments. And so if we take a broader perspective, perhaps we can gain a better understanding of the diversity amongst people with autism. I apologize for not being able to show you the data. Sorry for jumping ahead too much. Thank you. So lastly, I would like to invite each one to talk about how researchers can contribute to realizing an inclusive society based on your own research and your track record as we are celebrating the 15th anniversary, please. In the order of the presentation.
Yamaguchi-san, please. Well, to realize an inclusive society, what sort of contribution can the researchers make? I think that's the question that you asked me. Well, within my research, we try to formulate a network, and we believe that it is quite important to formulate a network with those who belong to other fields. I recognize that importance as well too. So in that sense, we must have the networking amongst the researchers so that we'll be able to make an approach comprehensive way, international way for the realization of the inclusive society. Today, within my report that I gave today, I talked about the laws and coordination with the welfares and so on, but there are many other sort of movements going on, including the shifting of the legal consultation and the trials towards the online. Therefore, coordination and cooperation with the specialists that belong to other fields is going to be quite important. And by working on such interdisciplinary cooperation, I think it will lead to further improvement. Thank you very much. Next up, Ko Sensei, over to you. Fan Sensei, I work on the regional research. What I have been thinking now is the role of the researchers in terms of formulating the inclusive society. For example, through the research activities, we'll be able to have an understanding in regards to the activities and behaviors and of the local community. By gathering the data on them, we would be able to work together with the local community people to co-create the legal, or say the systems, and we can serve as a bridge there. Another roles that can be played by us researchers is that within the local community, through our educational activities, we would be able to have the young generation get involved in our training and so on, so that we will be able to promote the exchange with of the people, such people with the people that belong to different age group, for example. Another point, by communicating our results of the research, we will be able to share the good examples, and good case examples from the people from the other community.
面から少しお話しさせていた
So
だく
let me
と、
speak from the perspective of
技
cells.
術の発達でその同じ
So with
細胞の
technical
一つ一つを
development,
調べることができるようになってい
we are
て、
now able to research
正常細胞
each
って言ったことにし
individual
ましたけど、
cells.
正常細胞の
So I said normal cells, but actually amongst normal cells, each cell is different and diverse. And this probably reflects on what Okamoto sensei said. And knowing the difference is one thing. I think a common thread. And cells are also very flexible and they are very adaptive to different environments. And they're very agile in changing their characteristics. This has been my experience through my research. So we are made up of these very flexible cells, which means that us humans should also be very flexible and adaptive in accepting different environments and different culture. So that is my comment. And as Professor Kida said earlier, cancer treatment is now focusing on killing the cancer itself. So we have very strong drugs that also damages normal cells. So having a better communication with the cells could perhaps stop the cells from proliferating too much. And maybe there's a way of coexistence. We do see some successful experiments toward that direction. So rather than rejection or elimination, aiming for coexistence with cancer could be one approach. Thank you very much. And lastly, Professor Okamoto, please. Thank you very much. So I have seen children with ASD grow up, and I would like to conduct research to support them in their adulthood in order that they're able to make choices for the betterment of their lives. And I have been working as a volunteer in various facilities, and it's very difficult to connect the clinical study and what is happening in the field. When it's a one-on-one relationship, there is a lot that you can apply, but when it comes to a larger group, you're not able to apply the methodology that was developed. So I would like to follow the footsteps of the fellow speakers in developing systems for diverse groups of people to realize a more inclusive society. Respecting the others' feelings, but also creating a society which fosters such a mutual understanding. Thank you very much.
Well, time is approaching to an end. Therefore, if I may, I would like to wrap up today. We have listened to the talks being provided, and we learned that the uniqueness and also diversity can also be found in the walls of the cells, and that actually is an important premise for formulation of the network, because if everyone is the same, there is no need for us to communicate to each other and exchange information. So what's important is to understand the network so that we'll be able to effectively utilize it, which I believe is going to be one of the important factors behind formulation of the inclusive society, which can be applied to a variety of things. One more thing. Well, I could see many commonalities in the specialty being tackled by each sensei, and maybe there are things that we would be able to learn from the inclusive society to begin with something that cannot be just realized in just based on activities conducted by one field, but can be the roles to be that can be played by each professional. Just as we do at the what's important is that we see the joint collaborative efforts, and I think we were able to show the importance of that to people today. Of course, for the realization of the inclusive society, there are many other things that we didn't tackle today, which is quite important, including education and that supports art, gender, and so on. Of course, some of them had been touched upon today, but There are many remaining issues that would have to be tackled. For the sake of the realization of the truly authentic inclusive society, we must exert further effort. I was able to feel that through the symposium. With this, I would like to close the roundtable by dear audience and speakers. Thank you very much indeed.